it's on credit, so
I'm hanging
it's
up my
fine.
phone.
It's nice to see you.
There we go. So, folks, we are actually live streaming. We have nobody actually on the live stream but us, so that's interesting. But we did have a wonderful opening rate for our e-blast announcing this event. So we should get some folks joining in shortly. Let's see. Let me do this. Yeah.
So it's good I was here. I just came in the door. I was going to be half an hour later, so this is good.
Well, we actually intended for you to come in at 4:30 or 6:30 Ralph's time, but this is fine because what we're going to talk about in the first half hour, you are certainly au courant on, and certainly welcome to join in the discussion. We have some rather important information that we want to share with folks.
Okay.
Um, oh, look, I might be able to come in. Can you see me? Can you see me? Is that possible on the live stream?
I
Yes?
see you.
Okay, good. Okay. Um, have we done an introduction? Do people know that this is the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, also known as the Unmasked Crusaders? I hope.
I'm not sure. I believe that the good folks at People for People Radio Network are about to live stream us, or maybe are live streaming us. Perhaps Yaz or Vanessa can let us know. Just
Yep.
did. Very good. All right, we are on.
No, 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 no,
No,
no, not yet.
not
Ralph,
yet. Okay.
count yourself in. I'm muting now. Count yourself in.
Welcome, welcome, folks, to the Unmasked Crusaders, the Dr. Rima Truth Reports with Dr. Rima, our guest Richard Sachs, and myself, Ralph Fusatola, JD. We are being broadcast over the People for People Radio Network. You can find out more about that if you go to opensourcetruth.com, and there's a link on the right side that gets you information on how to join People for People Radio Network. We are also live streaming over our own YouTube channel, Natural Solutions YouTube. And I see we have a few people joining us on the YouTube. That's wonderful. Uh, we have Dr. Rima's disappeared on me just now, but we shall see what that does. There she goes. All right.
Here I am.
All right.
Yes.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Alrighty. This was interesting. I tried to join on my computer and it said that I was part of the call, but I was not. So now I'm on my cell phone and part of the call, which is very exciting. Welcome to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. I am very, very glad to be here, not only with my co host, Ralph Fusatola, Council Ralph Fusatola, a true treasure of a freedom worker, but also with Richard Sachs of Lost Arts Radio. Uh, Richard and I have known each other for some time. Ralph and Richard and I have known each other for almost as long. And Richard is a speaker of truth and a unique thinker, and very, very exciting to have in my world. And we'll be talking about a lot of things with Richard. Um, so welcome, Richard, and thank you, Ralph. And I want to thank People for People Radio. If you're not going there regularly, peopleforpeople.com, if you're not going there regularly to listen to the programs, to look at the resources, to participate in the community, which includes the chat for the amazing lineup of programs, then you're missing a huge resource. We have to inform ourselves, we have to inform each other, and we have to support those people who are doing this work. People for People dot I'm sorry, I gave it wrong to you. Peopleforpeople.ning.com. Peopleforpeople.ning.com. And don't forget the .ning, because that's a very important part of the address. People.ning.com. Share that address on your social media. Those of you who have not yet been censored, if you're doing good work, you will be soon. Um, we have been ejected from Facebook. I wanted to begin with a question that we received from um, a lady who wrote to us about the advanced vaccine directive cards that are available on our on our e-commerce site. That's nsfmarketplace.com. The advanced vaccine directive cards, the gold wallet card, assert properly your internationally protected right. I'm looking for one. I've got one
Dr.
right
Rima, I've
here.
got it up on the screen. But
Okay.
folks who are on the
The,
radio can only imagine its beauty and its importance.
it is a thing of beauty because it protects your right of informed consent. And among the other things that it says is, I refuse all vaccines. Yes, you have the right to refuse vaccines under the Geneva Convention, which is automatically the law of every country that ratifies it, which is pretty much every country in the world. And a lady wrote to me yesterday, and I'm looking for her email. She said, and I quote, those cards, meaning this card, don't stand a chance to be valid. In California, they just mandated flu vaccines for all University of California staff and students and employees, and we lost our injunction against it. They finally put back in place the medical exemption with the caveat that you must have had a documented prior flu vaccine adverse reaction for you to get a medical exemption. Our only recourse is to get a religious exemption and have the documentation from a valid religious group that proves we are a vegetarian who cannot and will not put any animal or human byproducts in our bodies. So what is our actual recourse against this oppression? Well, there's a huge amount of erroneous information that is widely circulated in this letter. Either the state of California or the University of California or both are putting out basically legal balderdash. And this is the kind of thing that people are being faced with. So I thought that we would begin today's Dr. Rima Truth Reports by talking about the realities here and having Counsel Fusatola, also known as Ralph, talk about the realities here, what is valid and what the realities are. Even though your situation might be slightly different, you need to know what's real so you can counter garbage like this. And the ladies, I'm not saying the woman who wrote is fomenting garbage. I'm saying the information that she's been given to deal with is garbage. Ralph, could you talk about this?
I would love to do that. Let's see. We're going to begin by telling you about the history of the right of informed consent, because the gold card is actually an advanced medical directive that says, I refuse all vaccines. Some people have advanced medical directive cards that say, I'm a diabetic. Some people say cards that say, I refuse all transfusions. And these are widely accepted by people in the healthcare field, and they respect them because they are legally obligated to respect informed consent. It's been well over 100 years since the law of informed consent began to be developed in the world. One of the earliest cases is the 1914 case decided by then Judge, later Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, in which he said that a doctor who provides a medical intervention without the informed consent of the individual engages in assault and battery. And even if the intervention helps, you can sue the doctor for the assault because it was a touching without permission. Now that was over 100 years ago, but as recently as 2013, in the case of Missouri versus McNeely, we had a situation where the Supreme Court made it clear that without consent, there are serious privacy rights involved. In that case, McNeely was involved in a one-car accident, was rushed to an ER. He's being rolled in on a gurney. One side of him is the orderly, the other side is the police officer. The officer says to the orderly, "Take his blood. I want to know how much alcohol he's got in his blood." McNeely leans up from the gurney and says, and I assume it's in a slurred voice, he says, "Don't take my blood. I do not consent. Don't take my blood." They take his blood, arrest him for drunk driving, convict him for drunk driving, and somehow his case gets appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I would love to know how. It's very interesting how these things happen. But anyway, Supreme Court says he didn't consent. The officer could have picked up a phone and gotten an order from a judge literally in 1 minute. And the officer didn't do that, and McNeely didn't consent. And then the court went on and said, "We have never wavered from our commitment to the proposition that you have a protected privacy interest in preventing agents of the state from piercing the skin." Now, I humbly submit that if it's wrong to take blood out, it's even wronger to push things in without informed consent. So I believe that the informed consent law is clear. Now, unfortunately, back in 1905, before the development of informed consent, there was a case coming out of the Supreme Court, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is cited by all of the people who are telling that nurse in the letter that she has no rights. They're citing that case. And actually, they are misciting the case. As is often the case, we find that statists, people who believe in the power and majesty of the government, are people who are quite willing to misinterpret their own laws and misinterpret their own cases to give them ever more power. And that's, of course, exactly what happened. We have, as one of our cohorts, one of our great friends and fellow advocates for health freedom, Patricia Finn, a lawyer in New York State, the good health lawyer in Rockland County, New York, who is right now bringing a case before the U.S. Supreme Court that touches exactly on these issues. We're trying to help make her have the ability to do that by raising funds for that case. And if you go to a special Fundly account, Fundly is one of those crowdfunding accounts. Fundly is Fundly. So if you go to fundly.com/support natural therapies, with dashes between the words, support natural therapies, you will be able to help out and make sure that Patty Finn has the resources to push that case. And why is it important? Because she is exactly answering the question involved. What I'd like to do is open up, let me see, if I have it right here, I believe I have it right here. Document 57? No. Holding form? No. Oh, I thought I had it right here. Let's see if we can find it again. Here it is, SCOTUS case. All right. Let me open it up. This is a petition for writ of certiorari. Certiorari is the process whereby the U.S. Supreme Court oversees the lower courts. And among the reasons that the Supreme Court takes on cases is because two of the appeals courts have disagreed, or because there are conflicts between older precedents and newer cases. And of course, all of those issues are at stake in dealing with this 1905 case, which the vax pushers say gives them carte blanche. They can do anything they want. Well, that's not what the case says. And by the way, during the COVID-declared pandemic, there have been a number of cases where a number of judges all across the country, state after state, have said the police power is not without limit. No, you can't do what you're doing. You can't change the law on whim, essentially. And that is playing in big in the issues of our health freedom, and of course even of the outcome of the presidential election, which is still in doubt. Anyway, on to the Supreme Court of the United States. In Patty Finn's case, Jane Doe versus Merck and Company, and HHS, we have a situation in which Baby Doe, represented by his mother Jane Doe, Baby Doe is now 20 years old, but unfortunately so profoundly vaccine injured that he needs to be represented by a guardian ad litem, a parent guardian. So they were. He was injured by vaccination. Merck knew a month before he received the vaccine that it was causing these sorts of injuries and did not disclose. That's their main obligation. They must disclose. If they disclose, they are exempt. If they fail to disclose, they are liable. Courts have insistently turned down these cases, even though the law is clear. And so in this particular case, Patty Finn has one circuit court of appeals saying Jacobson versus Massachusetts means X, and another circuit court in another case she handled that was recently decided saying the opposite. And both of the statements being made are actually false statements. They're both, in different ways, false statements. Jacobson does not stand for the proposition that people can be forced to be vaccinated. It stands for the exact opposite. And what I'd like to do is read a couple of paragraphs. I gotta find them. I have to go to. All right. Here we go. I have to go down to the body because I think by hearing what's going on. Well, first of all, she says in her brief, the Supreme Court expressly created a medical exemption for compulsory vaccination in the Jacobson case when it said, the Supreme Court said, it would be cruel and inhuman to the last degree to vaccinate someone who had a medical excuse. So they're very clear, but let me go down, I want to go down to the other language. All right. And here, and this is, I think, injured again. No, we want to go one more notch. This case has not occurred in a vacuum. So she's talking about the past 100 years. In the 1905 landmark vaccine refusal case, the Supreme Court articulated a state's police power to mandate vaccinations. This is well understood. But Jacobson also required that if a vaccination is compulsory and could cause injury and death, and by the way, remember, our courts have held that all vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. But let me go on. But Jacobson also required that if a vaccination is compulsory and could cause injury and death, then courts must interfere for the protection of those affected. Jacobson foresaw over 100 years ago that there might be compulsory vaccinations that are a violation of, quote, rights secured by the fundamental law, unquote. And in such cases, the Supreme Court considered, quote, it the duty of the courts to so adjudge, end quote. Jacobson does not offer no-fault liability vaccine makers carte blanche. Jacobson required the district court to assess the constitutionality of Merck's FDA-licensed vaccines individually, as the Supreme Court did for the smallpox vaccine in the Jacobson case. This case has not occurred in a vacuum. And this is the most important part. We have to understand why and what's going on state by state all across the nation. This case, the case that Patty Finn is bringing to the U.S. Supreme Court, has not occurred in a vacuum. Foremost in the minds of the American people today is the increasing number of compulsory vaccines and the shrinking ability to obtain a medical or religious exemption for those not suitable to be vaccinated. As it is now, children in New York State already receive an estimated 53 plus vaccines by age 18 to attend school. The Second Circuit in the Phillips case dismissed an earlier due process challenge, holding that the statute goes beyond what the Constitution requires. Because in other words, the court said, no, you don't have any redress because the statute goes beyond what the Constitution requires by giving you exemptions, which at that time, Patty Finn goes on and says, included robust religious and medical exemptions, comporting with the Jacobson legal requirements. In the multitude of recent New York cases filed in the last year, unsuccessfully challenging the repeal of the religious exemption in New York in June of 2019, Jacobson is often erroneously cited by the courts for the proposition that the police power is without restraint. 5 years later, and this is after the New York's regulations are dramatically different than what the Second Circuit considered in the Phillips case in 2015. The statute no longer provides any religious exemption, and it offers a medical exemption that is barely obtainable for anyone, relying on the CDC's guidelines to determine eligibility. that is very often in conflict with the physician's learned medical opinion to waive vaccinations for the patient. State law,
Exactly.
exactly, Dr. Rima, right. State law is well established in this regard with respect to other biological drugs and leaves safety and efficacy of any drug up to the treating physician as the learned intermediary to consider the individual's medical history, genetic predispositions, and disabilities, and is the recognized authority to do so for his patient. That is why the
Now,
issue of drug safety in New York, as articulated by the
I want to
decisions, is, quote, left up to the physician under the learned intermediary rule. Okay.
exactly. And I want to make a point. Thank you very much for clarifying all of that. I am a licensed physician. I am the learned intermediary. If you come to me and I say, well, son of a gun, you shouldn't ever be vaccinated because it will do this and that and the other thing, or it might do this and that, or you have a genetic predisposition or whatever, and I write that as a medical exemption, the state has no right to say, no, 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 no. You were only allowed to say that a person had to have a previous anaphylactic reaction, or as this lady says, the state of California has said, or the University of California has said, you have to have had a documented prior flu vaccine adverse reaction to get a medical exemption for a flu vaccine. To which my response is, take the bastards to court, because there is no way that the state or the university or the employer or the Easter Bunny or, uh, you know, Christopher Columbus can tell the learned intermediary, the physician, what the reason may be for the medical exemption. And in New York State, where the state is saying, unless a child has had a previous anaphylactic reaction to a vaccine, as the CDC wants to call the only exemption allowable, a child cannot get a vaccine exemption. To which I, as the learned intermediary, say, au contraire, that is not consistent with the law. That is not consistent with physiology and with pathology. And when I give a medical exemption, I, by God, give a medical exemption based on medical reasoning, which I, have, as the learned intermediary, am permitted to offer and am permitted to base a vaccine exemption or any other kind of exemption upon. So the information that the physician can be limited by somebody who only wants this to be the reason for the exemption is legally incorrect in California, in New York, in any state in the United States, and in most countries, I suspect. And then the second thing that's incorrect here is if there is a religious exemption available, the religious exemption cannot be based on a narrow pre-decided belief system. You have to be a vegetarian and you have to be unwilling to put animal or human products in your bodies. Nonsense. That's not what a religious exemption is. A religious exemption is a declaration in one form or another that for one religiously based, spiritually based reason or another, you choose not to do this or that or the other thing.
But
And
let
it
me add one
violates
thing to that, Dr.
conscience.
Rima, and that is that you don't have to give the reason when it's a religious
Exactly.
reason.
Exactly. So,
And in fact, our courts have handled this issue repeatedly, and they did so during the Vietnam War. And it had to do with the rules regarding conscientious objection. At the beginning of the war, the law had been as it had been for several generations. In order to be a conscientious objector to war, you had to belong to one of a couple of churches that were pacifist and taught a specific doctrine. By the end of the war, the courts were holding that as long as your personal philosophical beliefs hold the same position in your life as religious beliefs hold in the lives of Seventh-day Adventists or other pacifist churches, then you had a valid religious exemption. And in fact, as recently as just a couple of years ago, a New Jersey administrative judge said in a flu vaccine refusal case, where the woman, the nurse involved, refused to be vaccinated, not for religious reasons. She said she had no religious reasons, but she had philosophical reasons for refusal. And she was fired. And the administrative judge said that she had a right to unemployment insurance because it was a wrongful firing. They should have considered her philosophical objections to be as valid as someone else's religious objections. So we see that the law is clear. It's just that the empowered bureaucrats during the declared pandemic feel they can do whatever they want to do. And as I've said several times, the courts around the country are saying no.
And that's precisely the reason that I brought this up. And that is, if you are faced with misinformation and you go along with it, then you have made a mistake that has probably compromised your own health and your own health freedom. If you are faced with information that you don't believe is true, you need to check it out. You cannot accept as accurate the information that people who don't want you to exercise your rights are giving you. A, they may be lying. B, they may be misinformed. You need to assert your rights by understanding your rights first. And what you hear from doctors, from administrators, from HR people, from government bureaucrats, what you hear may very well not be accurate. Check it out and then take steps to protect your rights.
Exactly. And Dr. Riemann, may I make a suggestion? I know we have Richard we beg your indulgence for a little while longer, although you can join in the discussion, you know. We respect your knowledge about the lost arts.
Anytime you can force your way into the discussion, you're welcome, Richard.
You got it. Dr. Riemann, I
did have, Ralph, I did have one question about what you said.
Go ahead.
And that was that we understand informed consent is one of those unalienable rights that gets recognized or not at various times.
Right.
But you mentioned quickly in the case where the man did not give consent to have his blood drawn, that the police officer could have easily gotten a court order.
Right.
What difference in the world would that make if it's...
An individualized. It can't be a general, you know, the governor issues an order, everyone must be vaccinated. No. A judge has to look at it. That's what the Jacobson case really says. A judge has to look at that person and that vaccine and that person's doctor. And
yeah, but that's not my question. Whatever the details of that are, how can any judge overcome the unalienable right of informed consent?
I know. So well, in the case of the McNeely case, it's a search and seizure case. And so we have a constitutional provision on search and seizure. If it's
so your search and seizing is
blood
what?
Out. That's taking blood out. That's not putting something in. And
yeah, that sounds really questionable to me. I would say that no court order can overcome a truly unalienable right.
Yeah, how can I alienate the right to enter my skin? Right.
It's just like declaring an emergency can't suspend the Bill of Rights.
And that's what the courts have been saying, by the way. They have actually been saying that to some degree. But unfortunately, a number of the injunctions, TROs, and preliminary injunctions have been denied. Although I believe when the cases are fully briefed and argued and they go up to appeal courts, there's going to be a lot more of those cases won than we expect. Now, Dr. Rima, I know that you did some research on a very important question relating to all of this, and that is, what are these vaccines that are coming at us? Because, frankly, the masking mandates are to get us ready for the vaccine mandates.
Absolutely.
And so what are these vaccines, Dr. Rima? That's what we need to know, and that's important.
And I invite you, Richard, you're very knowledgeable in a wide range of areas, and I suspect you'll have a good deal to contribute here too. But let me give a little introduction first. We are being told that there are all kinds of candidate vaccines racing toward us, God help us all, at warp speed, to save us from this dreadful pandemic. You know, the pandemic that is a case-demic because the testing is so very often positive. And in fact, the testing is so very much more often positive than the presence of the thing that's being tested. In other words, false positives are rampant. Elon Musk famously last week was tested 4 times for the COVID-19 disease state, and 2 of the tests came back positive and 2 of the tests came back negative. And then I read an astonishing physician's response saying, well, the tests weren't meant to diagnose the disease. They were meant to alert people to the possibility that they might have the disease and to take precautions as if they did have the disease. To which my response was, excuse me? What did you just say? What you just said is it doesn't matter what the result is. You should just decide that it's as if it were positive. What? So, okay, that's gibberish. That's sycophantish medical gibberish, which is very much the same as sycophantish political gibberish and sycophantish military or diplomatic gibberish. It's all gibberish. Okay, so the tests are meaningless, and we don't know how many people, quote, have COVID, but we do know that most people who have COVID or who die from COVID are in fact people who were sick and generally mistreated, and they may be sick with any number of things, but they get a whole lot sicker when, for instance, they're put on ventilators. We also know that there are simple ways of helping the body's immune system support itself and simple ways of helping the body get rid of a problem. They include vitamins and minerals and other immune supporting factors. But we are being told, oh, the vaccine will save us. Well, says Fauci, not exactly. It may not work. And well, says Gates, not exactly. We won't be back to a new normal until we have the 2nd generation of the COVID vaccines in every single human being on the planet. And meanwhile, the vaccine testing has been abridged, abbreviated, aborted, abominated. And so, as bad as vaccines generally are, we don't even know how much worse these are. And there are different kinds. So I thought I would take just a moment and talk about the 5 different kinds of COVID-19 vaccines racing toward us and identify the most common one. There are dozens of vaccine candidates, contenders, because there's so much money involved in the sale of these vaccines that a lot of people want to get in on it. There are inactivated virus vaccines, there are vectored virus vaccines, there are protein vaccines, there are DNA vaccines, and there are RNA vaccines. For example, Moderna and Pfizer are RNA vaccines. And what they do is introduce proteins, mRNA, messenger RNA, into the cells of your body after you've been unlucky enough to be vaccinated with these brews. And the messenger RNA manufactures proteins. That's what messenger RNA does. The DNA typically will give instruction to the messenger RNA to manufacture these proteins for this enzyme or this tissue or whatever, and the messenger RNA will assemble the bits and make the protein. So a protein is entered into your cells, or I'm sorry, a factory is entered into your cells to do something. In this case, allegedly, to put out antibodies to the coronavirus. I will remind you that coronaviruses have been known for quite some time, for decades, and that a successful coronavirus vaccine has never been made, whether it's for the common cold or SARS or MERS. They just don't work particularly well, but they do have a lot of side effects. Messenger RNA doesn't go away. It stays in your body and it keeps pumping out whatever it keeps pumping out. And do you really believe that the only messenger RNA put into your body will be the one about the COVID-19 virus spike protein? That's hard to believe when you consider that there are at least five other viruses contained in the messenger RNA information packet. We don't know why. All of these vaccines will be nanochipped and use nanotechnology. Then there has never been a messenger RNA vaccine approved for human use. So of course we're warp speeding couple of them, and we're going to inject them widespread. And then whatever happens, happens. Hey, what do you know? What can you do? Then there's the DNA vaccine. There are no DNA vaccines approved for human use. There are DNA vaccines approved for veterinary use, and they don't always go too well. There's a lot more feline and canine cancer in these vaccinated animals. DNA vaccines actually do insert material directly into your genome. The consequences of that can only be described as breathtakingly horrifying. Then there are the protein vaccines that introduce foreign proteins into your body for your immune system to get all active against. For instance, antibodies or antigens that you're supposed to produce antibodies to. And as we know well, as listeners to this show and watchers of this live stream know well, the consequences of that is the panoply of negative consequences of vaccine reactions. And then, of course, there are the vectored viruses. Now, vectored viruses have never been used in vaccines for human beings before either. Vectored viruses are so dangerous that in order to have a vectored virus vaccine, you first have to have an environmental impact statement. Of course, that's never been done. The vectored viruses take something like an adenovirus, stick something into it, like, for instance, a piece of a coronavirus, and then put that into your body to let that infect your cells the way a virus infects your cells, and to let that hijack your DNA mechanism, which then makes its own messenger RNA and typically makes its own, makes itself again, replicates itself until your cells burst and spread that virus.
Wait, you mean you have to have a viral disease in order to be protected from the viral disease?
Something like that. Yep. And then the last one is the inactivated virus vaccine, like, for instance, the polio vaccine, which even the World Holocaust Organization has finally admitted is causing polio all over the world, as the measles vaccine causes measles, along with other things. So we have these 5 types of vaccines, and they're being rapidly brought toward us in what I call the syringe of death. And each one is worse than the others in a kind of circular wheel of misfortune. Wherever the clacker stops, as the wheel of misfortune runs, if you happen to get that kind of vaccine, you're in big trouble. Some of them are double trouble, and some of them are triple trouble. So whether it's inactivated virus, vectored virus, protein, DNA, or RNA vaccine, the net consequences are unknown. And the net consequences are not something that anybody cares about. One of the environmental factors that would have to be studied, by the way, in all of these vaccines is, since they're introducing tiny nanoparticles by the scads, by the billions, of titanium into these vaccines, what will be the environmental impact when you die and either are cremated, releasing all this titanium into the environment, or when you're in a coffin and you rot and you go back into the soil and the water table, putting all this titanium in. That's just one of the tiny little pieces of environmental impact. And it seems to me that the kind of discussion that you have to have about these things is very much akin to talking to a floridly schizophrenic person and then taking apart the grammar and the meaning and the sentence structure of everything they've said to see just how crazy it is. Before you start doing that, you already know it's crazy. This is crazy, my friends. These vaccines are not part of a health structure. They're part of a destruction structure, which is why this card is so important. Properly asserting your right of informed consent, with all of us doing it by our millions, is vital to continuing to be humans genetically, physiologically, socially, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually.
In fact, it's so important to repeat that, Dr. Rima. The more people who assert their informed consent rights, the more powerful the rights become. If you
Precisely.
fail to assert your informed consent right, it will be, as the lawyers say, deemed waived. If you do not assert it, the way McNeely did, it's waived. Indeed, there was a later case to the Supreme Court in a similar situation in a different state, where the person was unconscious, and the officer was allowed to get the blood without an order of any court, because the person was not able to refuse consent. So we got to realize that. You have to be able to do it. If you're rushed into an emergency room unconscious, the folks there are supposed to check your pockets, your wallet, your pocketbook, whatever, and see if you have any advanced medical directive cards. And if they see one that says I'm a diabetic, or I'm allergic to penicillin, or I refuse all vaccines, they have to put that on your chart.
And they have to honor it. Let me also say that there's another card. If you, like me, do not wish to have a diaper on your face, do not wish to have a PSYOPs training device on your face called a mask, knowing that masks do absolutely nothing to reduce viral transmission.
Well, don't they actually break up the particles?
They make things worse. They actually make the transmission worse. And by the way, if masks worked, we shouldn't have any flu season this year, because there are so many people wearing masks. Nobody should get the bloody flu, but of course they will. So we have an advanced sanitary masking directive also at nsfmarketplace.com. These are important. Richard, you have had no opportunity to say anything. I've been successful so far. See if you can defeat me.
I think I may have to give up. I think you were very.
Thing, folks, before we go on to Richard, and that is you can get both masks. You can get
Okay,
both
I'll try and
masks
get it in an hour.
in two places. You can go to opensourcetruth.com, and you'll see the two of the masks are right there on the right column somewhere, and you can do it that way. Or you can go to one of our tiny URLs, tinyurl.com/mask exemption. That's tinyurl.com/mask exemption. Either there or really at opensourcetruth.com, you can get your cards. You'll help support health freedom advocacy and also help support your right to assert your right. I'm sorry, Richard. Back to you.
Ha ha, Richard. Didn't work so far.
I know. Rat spoiled again.
Tell us,
Sorry,
Richard,
I didn't
what
mean to say
have you
rats.
been doing? We were on your program, I think, sort of at the beginning of the lockdowns earlier this year, and you're on our program now. Can you tell us what have you been doing with all the time you have on your hands, since the government doesn't want you to have a social life?
Okay, Ralph, you were cutting out just a little bit. Would you repeat the question for me?
I said, we last saw you at the beginning of the lockdowns, and we were on your radio program, And so here we are, many months later, or a few months later. What have you been doing? How has the declared pandemic impacted your life and your ability to help other people gain and maintain a healthy status?
I think if our objective is to get this thing reversed before it runs its course into the so-called new normal and beyond that to what I think is total extermination agenda, not just population reduction, which a lot of people have caught on to, but total population reduction to nothing, including the perpetrators. In other words, I see it as a suicide mission. And I think if we want that reversed, there are a couple of major challenges that stand out. One is that the reality is so much like a sci-fi movie that normalcy bias is a powerful barrier to people really understanding it, being emotionally ready to handle it. Because if they even look at what's happening with the idea that it might be true, fear comes up. I think it's an emotional challenge, not an intellectual one, because we might be able to explain it logically why it's true that the pandemic is fake and all that. And in reality, people hear often that the numbers of cases and things like that are overblown or that they're not that serious or anything. The reality is actually beyond that, because due to the nature of the PCR test and probably the underlying nature of the rapid response tests, there are no numbers in this so-called pandemic. No one has any verifiable way to say the cases beyond those people that are identified by syndrome, not by test. And the syndrome that's been coming up that looks unusual enough to be identified with this virus is the one where there's no pneumonia and the lungs work fine, but there's an inability to absorb oxygen. And Rima, I just lost your picture, Dr. Rima.
I actually cut my picture out specifically so that the bandwidth on your picture would be better.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
It was a sacrifice of almost immaterial dimension.
It's awesome. I don't know if I should even keep talking or not, but
I think you should keep talking, and I think that people will be able to, the bandwidth is better. Let me ask our producer, Gaz, is that a reasonable way to look at this, or should I in fact keep the video on?
He'll probably continue. Your video appears on my live stream, by the way, but you're not there. It's just a gray field.
I'm not there. Isn't that strange? Okay. All right. I will. Ignore me. I have no idea why I'm not there.
I see the corner of someone's. There you are. You're back.
There. God, I was in another realm altogether. Richard, you were talking about the fact that I'm so sorry. You were talking about the fact that we have no real case data. This could not be more important, and you're completely accurate. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the reason the PCR test was chosen as the foundation for the pandemic for a reason. And not because it was the most accurate test, but because it's not a test at all. It's a technique for finding almost any amount of genetic material of any desired type in a person's sample and blowing it up as high as you want to show that it looks bigger and bigger and bigger. And you do that by adjusting the number of so-called cycles that are used in the PCR test. And in the case where you want to be able to manipulate the numbers, it's perfect. Actually, it was a great choice because you can show and prove if the people are not paying attention or are believing nonsense about it, that the pandemic is so terrible that, I mean, everybody should be hiding in their bathroom and wearing several masks at a time. And that's the way they're using it. And in a way, it's lucky for us because they could have released a truly dangerous virus. And this one has a small number of cases, not from identified from the PCR test, but from the number of people that have this particular syndrome, combination of symptoms, which is inability to get oxygen across the barrier between the air in the lungs and the blood. And it's easily cured within 24 to 48 hours by about 3 major protocols, all of which are secret and banned. And the doctors get attacked and fired or worse. And so those cases, there are some, but they're not identified by the PCR test. They're identified by observation clinically. And as far beyond that, it's not that there are no low numbers. There are no numbers at all. And if that was really comprehended, no one would think that there was, let alone a pandemic, any incidence of anything because the test says nothing. So I think that's one point to look at.
And in fact,
Not
with
only is
regard
it
to that
one point. Go ahead, Ralph.
With regard to that point, a few days ago, Elon Musk, the Tesla company, was feeling a little under the weather and he decided to have a COVID test. But being who he is, he had 4 COVID tests. 2 of them came back positive, 2 of them came back negative.
Yeah.
Right. The tests are beyond meaningless, but what Richard is saying is even more important than that. And I was hoping to break in, stop you from talking, and paradoxically ask you to elaborate on why there is basically no disease and why or how you can say that the protocols that are available are simple, are widely known, and are suppressed.
Well, they're not as widely known as they should be, but the doctors that have used them know about them. And they've been presenting them on local TV stations, which made the mistake of letting them come on and then got censored on a national level. And there are 2 or 3, I mean, one protocol was actually done, not reported on TV, but by Dr. Brownstein, who's an expert in iodine and some other things. And he came out and said, well, I've had, I forget the number, 300 or 400 patients, and none of them even had to go to the hospital. And some were and these are real cases. These are not PCR test cases. These are where the people couldn't breathe, but their lungs worked fine. There was no fluid. You know, ventilators would have killed them, and they didn't go on ventilators. They didn't go to the hospital. And they were symptom-free in 24 to 48 hours. And the protocols he was using were written about in articles, and then he was attacked by the FTC. They chose that way to shut him down. And they were saying, you're selling an unproven remedy. And the fact that it's being demonstrated right out in the open is not considered proof. It has to be put into an approved medical journal, peer-reviewed by people that would cut out anything like what he's doing. So it's by definition unproven. And they said, if you keep talking about this, then, you know, we'll have to shut down your practice and send you to prison. And the other doctors have been talking about other protocols. All of them seem to work 100% within about 2 days. So that's what I was talking about with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. If there is a viral disease, and it's not clear because the virus has not successfully met Koch's postulates, which says
not at all. Yeah.
If there is a disease that is supposedly suspected of being caused by an organism, virus, bacteria, parasite, whatever, you have to isolate the organism, you have to grow it, you have to replicate it so that you have more of it. Then you have to put it into another experimental subject that can develop the disease.
And is healthy. Healthy
and doesn't have the disease. And then you have to re-isolate it from the formerly healthy, now disease exhibiting experimental subject. And that has never, ever, 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 ever been done with this virus. It was said to be causing the disease. The disease was said to be something called COVID-19. And now we've got all of this non-scientifically based propaganda and social consequence to something that may or may not be present, may or may not cause a disease, may or may not be a problem. The problem is the response to the alleged problem.
Well, and may or may not is pretty generous because there's no indication at all to suggest any evidence that it causes anything. Because speaking of Koch's postulates, step one was isolating the virus and then having that sample to at least compare to people who were supposedly sick with it. CDC recently revealed that they don't have any samples of the virus. So
Right.
there's really no evidence that I know of that it's been isolated, and that's step one. It looks
Now,
like a complete fraud.
I would contest that.
Okay.
I believe that something that may meet the definition of it in the statement you just made. I don't know of any evidence that it has been isolated. Well, what might be the it that you're talking about
Uh-huh.
is a patented organism that was patented here in the United States at Duke University in 2015. And the research for that is the National Institutes of Health. And that organism was then transferred to the Wuhan laboratory in Wuhan, the Wuhan CDC laboratory, which was at that point the only level 4 biosecurity lab in China. And that laboratory was upgraded with US taxpayer dollars, as we know, to be able to handle the virus. And then the US taxpayer dollars also were used to bring in from about 1,000 miles away a colony of intermediate horseshoe bats through which the gain of function research and cycling the organism, the virus, through the bats was continued while the organism was being genetically tinkered with. And we believe, or some of us believe, that that organism, that virus, which is patented, does exist, and we know that a vaccine to it, against it, in relationship to it, was patented a year later by the Pirbright Institute, which is a Bill Gates funded organization, also in the United States. So there's something out there that seems to be a direct descendant of the SARS virus, SARS-1, and it seems to be genetically engineered according to the worldwide scientific analysis of this organism, which may or may not cause disease. It seems to have 4 strands of the HIV-1 virus. It seems to have 1 strand of the SARS virus DNA, and it seems to have 2 strands of the falciparum parasite that causes malaria DNA. So it's a pretty amazing, pretty heavily bioengineered organism, which may be causing disease.
I have to clarify then what I said, because I agree with everything you just said. I think there's enough evidence to say at this point that it looks like every detail of what you just said is not questionable anymore. We know there's a track from the US lab in North Carolina to the NIH funding that Fauci was aware of and probably approved personally under Obama.
It's his department that funded it.
Right, and that was in Obama's administration. I think everybody was in favor of it. It was sent to Wuhan with US funding. I think it was released on purpose because it's too much of a coincidence that they had Event 201 and the other things leading up to it, saying what would happen if a coronavirus got out and caused a terrible pandemic. Oh, one just got out. Amazing. So I don't think there's a question about that part. What I was talking about was that they haven't taken the people that they claim have it and isolated any such thing from those people. And CDC, when asked for a sample, said, we actually don't have it. So I think there's no question that it was developed and patented, and it was a chimera of the description that you're giving. But isolating it out of the people that get sick now, they can't do, because some of those like died of COVID when they fell out of an airplane or had a motorcycle crash. And even then, they test the PCR test, and they can show that they had COVID-19 or had SARS-CoV-2. But that's a fake test. So I'm just saying that they haven't isolated it in the current situation, and CDC's not holding it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree completely. I just thought it was very important to differentiate what we do know. We know that this virus is out there. We know that it's a chimera. Chimera, by the way, for those of you um, who may find the word interesting or puzzling, chimera means it's made up of very different sorts of genetic material. A chimera was an animal that had a head of this and horns of that and feet of that and so on. So a genetic chimera has DNA from various things that don't go together ordinarily, like the malaria parasite, the HIV virus, the coronavirus, that's SARS, etc. We know all of that. What we don't know, and what Richard, our guest Richard Sachs of Lost Arts Radio, is emphasizing correctly. What we don't know is that it's got anything at all to do with anybody's disease. We don't know that, and we have good reason to suspect that it has nothing to do with anybody's disease. That is vastly and vitally different from any kind of official or semi-official or controlled opposition narrative that you're hearing.
There's a real good.
Do we have any evidence that more people will have died in 2020 than in 2019, or more people will have died of some infection in 2020 than died in previous years? Now, I know we do have statistics that show a lot less infants are dying because they're not getting as many vaccines. In fact, hundreds of infants a week are not dying who were dying just before the lockdown. But what about the rest of us? Is it only old folks who have died anyway who are dying?
The documentation that we have is quite clear, and you and I, Ralph, did an analysis a couple of months into the supposed pandemic, showing that the death rates had actually dropped in the United States from the previous year because the traffic accidents, the 28,000 traffic accidents were missing.
And people not dying from hospital. People not dying from hospital mistakes too.
The fake numbers of people dying of flu, 68,000, 88,000, 372,000, all those nonsense numbers that are usually attributed to flu deaths are now being shoved over into the COVID column. But the total number of deaths is actually either the same or slightly down.
Yeah, there aren't going to be any more CDC recognized flu deaths. So you had said something in the last section about that you can't, I wish I remembered what it was, I made a note. But the point is that it's not going to be allowed to die of flu anymore, according to CDC.
CDC has stopped tabulating flu deaths. So
they cured the flu. I mean, it's eradicated.
But you should still get your flu shot, even though Pentagon and several other studies have shown conclusively that people who get a flu shot are 36% more likely to get COVID disease, to develop serious COVID pneumonia. So either what they're saying is all those people who get the flu from their flu shot now are getting the newly labeled COVID from their flu shot, or they're saying it further weakens the immune system, as we know it does, and therefore, if there is something going around that you can get infected with, by God, you're going to get it.
But it won't be the flu, that's for sure.
No, it's not the flu anymore. That's so 2019.
And if we hadn't had flu shots, who knows, it would have never been eradicated, So this is cutting edge science.
But keep getting your flu shots.
So we're
Well, you have
about
to make it stay eradicated. That's
we're
right.
about halfway through the program. At this point, I'd like to thank People for People Radio Network and remind folks that they can join that private network if they go to peopleforpeople.ning.com. I think it's an important way of listening in on us. We also, of course, are here on the YouTube live stream. And Dr. Rima, there have been a number of folks here on the live stream who've been making comments. I know you can't see those, so I thought maybe I would throw some of those comments.
Yes.
And let's see what's
Well,
going on. There's a
actually,
lot
I
here.
can see
I
them
mean, there's a lot of really interesting
because
information.
our good friends are putting them up, and I'm just looking at some of them. I just lost the correct conversation in which they. Okay, I take it back. You tell us what the comments are. Oh, there we are. I got it.
All right.
Okay. One of the comments is, since the organism was patented, aren't there legal ramifications to those who unleashed it?
I would think so. Of course, they are passing laws as we speak to make sure that nobody is held legally responsible for all the damages that this operation has caused. And, I guess we should call it 2030 in 2020, Agenda 2030 in 2020. We are all being trained to live in the world of Agenda 21.
I participated on Sunday for part of the proceedings of a commission of people from around the world whose intention is to hold the perpetrators globally responsible. It's a people's tribunal. And Ralph and I are among the judges who have been appointed. This has no legal standing, but presumably it will have public standing, as such tribunals sometimes do. And in that tribunal, a group of very, very, very smart people are asking very detailed and very deep questions about precisely this. So if you're not supporting people like People for People.ning.com radio so that they can continue to bring this to you, if you're not supporting Counsel Finn's case at fundly.com / Ralph / what?
It's forward slash support natural therapies. It's support natural therapies. Right.
If you're not doing that, if you're not supporting Lost Arts Radio, if you're not supporting the Natural Solutions Foundation, what you're asking is for your rights and your options to be abrogated. God knows the other side has more money than God, but we, in order to go up against them, we need your support. Richard, would you like to comment on this and then go forward with what you had intended to say before we interrupted you?
Yeah, sure. What I was going to say is about the real danger of the pandemic, which is very, very real. As far as funding goes, we need funding, but we don't really do anything for it except look for donations. And then we have a private club which goes a lot deeper into these things that has small dues. And if anybody's interested in that helps fund us. And you can find out about both of those at lostartsradio.com. There's a donate button there. And then planetaryhealingclub.com is the access point to our private group where it's live and interactive every week. And we go into a lot more depth in health and consciousness and world events issues. But what I was going to say is that even though at the moment the virus itself appears to be easily handled as far as the symptoms that it does cause in some people, there are two issues of real danger. One is that Bill Gates and some other people have promised, and I believe them because of their track record, that they are basically going to give us a real bioweapon level virus in the very near future. And that what we're doing so honorably to give up our lives and our economy and our social interaction and everything else in response to COVID-19 is going to come in really handy when the bioweapon gets released, because it's going to be more of the same measures that are going to be required for that. Um, so that's, according to them, that's coming. And nobody in Congress or the president or anybody has talked seriously about shutting down all bioweapons research in the US and pressuring other countries to do the same, which has been legally required since 1990 in the US. There's a Convention on Biological Weapons Development that was passed by both houses of Congress, signed by George H.W. Bush in 1989, written by Francis Boyle, and that made it illegal to do any of this kind of work. And it's still going on right out in the open in the US in at least 12 major laboratories today, and probably in many other countries of the world. And it has, I agree with Dr. Boyle on this, it has no legitimate function at all. So if that's not shut down, the fact that they're developing all these bioweapons, it's highly unlikely that they won't decide to use them. Well, they've already decided, just proceeding along with Bill Gates' scenario. But I think the reason they wanted to see what they could do with a not very physically harmful virus is that if they could do it psychologically, which is what's happening now, they might not even need to mess around with a more serious bioweapon, because if they shut people down, make you hide in your house, make you wear a mask, make you stay away from everybody else, shut down all the businesses, which they're about to take the next step on starting in the next few days. If they can do that, they'll destroy the economy. And people may think that, well, that's just the stock market or something esoteric like that. No, it's your ability to eat any food and get anything else that you need to survive. The results.
Indeed, Richard. It's very
Pardon, Ralph, I
clear.
didn't hear you.
Indeed, it's very clear we've been promised by the individual who's been anointed as the savior in chief, namely Joe Biden. We've been promised
Yeah,
dark winter.
that's right. He said there'd be an immediate national mask mandate
Right.
with no exemptions.
Right.
And
Now,
I'm sure he's just following orders because he's so
well,
compromised.
he's very,
But beyond that, I think the danger that people don't see is that when you do a couple of things economically, you shut down production because you go to a plant or a manufacturing place or a farm and you test everybody with a fake test and somebody's positive, you shut down the whole operation for everybody's safety and send them all home. Production stops. And then you combine that with issuing free money based on nothing, and eventually that equation means the money is Zimbabwe money. It has no value.
right.
There's nothing to buy and there's nobody producing anything. The first people to die from that are in Africa and in other third world locations. After that, it starts killing people in the first world countries. And
There is
that's
a
the exact
famine. There is a
trajectory right
famine
now.
already starting in many parts of the world. Now
Absolutely.
that's that. Now the
Yeah.
folks who have been on the chat, on the live stream chat, been saying a number of things regarding that, and it's maybe worth a little bit of our time to listen to those voices. Panelists, please detail the difference between viruses and exosomes. You might want to come back to that question later. That's because the poison of the poison in the vaccine, the greatest clue ever, says one of them. They tell us people have died, but funeral homes in my area are not even busy. Their status of occupants at rest is the same as before Corona. Another one says lots of empty hospitals they claim are overflowing. The third person says this COVID charade is good for one thing. You see zombies more clearly. A muzzle is a red flag. Then one other person says they tell us people have died, but they haven't revealed whether the deceased had any pre-existing conditions. Recently, the RN who's in the news had a pre-existing lupus. Was not revealed. Masks are many things, says another, including being a muzzle. Is there actually a virus at all? Another person says. My understanding is the U.S. has 3 million deaths per year per average for all causes. This year's averaging fewer than normal. which I suppose would be the decline in automobile travel. Anybody here otherwise? Another person says, I know this for a fact, there is no virus. I agree. Germ theory was always fallacious. What we have is chemical pneumonia plus radiation from the 5G rollout. I went 360 on this, beginning with no virus and winding back there as a former graduate student in virology. Virology. Not vril, viral. Okay. Magical, ever-evoking symptoms. Asymptotic, no less. Echo is really bad.
There are
There's an echo.
people.
Okay, let me see if I can reposition my.
There are people who are saying that all of the symptoms of COVID 19 are actually the symptoms of radiation poisoning, and that's become very, very popular on the internet. The problem is that it's factually untrue. There are people who are saying that the non-ionizing radiation of 5G, and it can be very harmful whether it's ionizing or non-ionizing, but they're saying that the non-ionizing radiation of 5G somehow becomes ionizing radiation. They're saying all kinds of things. There's a huge amount of chatter and a striving for information, much of which that includes all of the official narrative, and much of the unofficial narrative is simply false. It's scientifically unsound. But what we do know is that the disease rate that we're being told that we have, the death rate that we're being told that we have from this disease, perhaps the very presence of a specific and unique disease itself, is all inaccurate and unconfirmed. We do know that we are being faced with and that we're being exposed to a level of drama and drivenness, much like cowboys or Indians driving bison across the plain to a cliff that the bison didn't know how to avoid. We're being driven toward global vaccination. The global vaccine has so many harmful possibilities that I believe that it is the true danger at this point. I believe, who the hell knows what's in that vaccine, really? And who the hell knows what the nanoparticulate functional parts are intended to be? Are they receivers? Are they transmitters? Are they AI links so that your brain, your biology, and your very existence become part of a hive of artificial intelligence controlled semi-humanity? I think so. I think that's part of the reality. We do know that if you, terrorists typically, if they bomb something, will have a second bomb set so that when the responders show up and the people who are supposed to be helpful come to help the wounded, then the larger blast is detonated. And I'm not convinced that we're not seeing the vaccine getting us ready for a real pandemic and a real plague that is triggered by or exacerbated by whatever it is that's being put into our bodies if we allow the vaccine to go into our bodies. There's a great deal of...
There's a question. Dr. Rima, is the vaccine going to cull the population? And I think Richard is saying way more than cull.
Way more than cull. And what I'm saying is that the entire situation, let's not fight about whether there, quote, is, end quote, a virus. Let's not do a Bill Clinton over the verb to be. Let's just realize that the entire situation, as it is being designed and delivered, is meant to cow us, cull us, and kill us. That's what this is designed to do. We can get involved in an argument about whether there, quote, is, end quote, a virus. Yeah, there's a virus out there. Is it causing the disease? Well, that's an interesting discussion. That's not the point. That's not the point. The point is this whole situation is carefully engineered to control us, to cull us, and to kill us. What are we doing about it? Richard, would you like to comment?
Yeah, a few of those things that you mentioned. I agree that whether this discussion, which is interesting, of whether there isn't or is or is not a virus, is not the main point, because it's working for their purposes, whether there is or not.
Yes.
Personally, I trust the labs. I trust government and agencies and big corporations not to be throwing away billions of dollars without doing something bad. And when when they're doing BSL-4 labs, I don't think they're all parading around making believe they're handling pathogens. I think they really are. But again, it doesn't matter because there are two dangers that are coming out of this. One is certainly all the vaccines, and it's, people might wonder why there are five or six so-called candidates. The information that I'm getting is that they're targeting different populations. And
Exactly.
just like there are different recipes in the geoengineering for the poison that falls on different parts of the country and things like that, these vaccines are not just by at random more than one, because they could have developed just one and given it to everybody. But they're going to target certain age groups, certain nationalities, certain racial groups, things like that. So the vaccines, which they realized, if we can give one vaccine to 7 billion people, why can't we do it like once a month or once a week? And why stop at just one time? So I think it's planned to be periodic. The other thing is that it's not just the vaccines that are the danger, it's the Great Reset. And even though that's by stages, that's to totally destroy any vestige of freedom in the world, and in fact, to destroy sovereign countries and put everything under a higher level dictatorship that works through the medical tyranny, but is actually coming from a higher level. And they're already talking about, like recently in Canada, there was a request for proposals to build concentration camps all over the country. And one of the members of parliament asked about that and said, you know, this RFP was coming out. It's really interesting. And I'm wondering, it doesn't specify COVID patients. It's just for additional uses to put people in. Why is this happening, and how many people are going to be taken to the camps and all this? And his mic was cut off, and they said, next question. And that's happening in many of the remaining so-called Western countries. The other countries, it's not happening so much in because most of them are already too far gone, and they're under total tyranny for the most part. But the Western countries are still showing some threat that some people remember the idea of individual freedom, and that has to be eradicated. So I think that this great reset, which is really being pushed now through the World Economic Forum and everybody that's repeating what they say, this guy Klaus Schwab, who's apparently the founder and under direction from higher than him, and who's running it now, is saying that this is a wonderful opportunity to change the whole world and get rid of these unsustainable variants of human freedom. And that's really their main objective. But I think that the pandemic is going to, it could, I agree with you, Dr. Rima, it could segue over to a virus that is really obviously killing a lot of people. It just, they haven't used that yet.
Well,
Let's
they've
talk
tried to
about
use it,
Klaus Schwab.
Dr. Rima. Haven't they tried to use it? Didn't General Burt tell us repeatedly 3 and 4 years ago, 4 and 5 years ago, that there had been a half a dozen attempts at creating that sort of weaponized?
I actually was I actually was the one who was saying that. General Burt was kind enough to agree with me. I have noticed that there has been one genetically engineered attempt at um, a a plague virus, a depopulation virus after another, and so far all of them have mercifully failed. Um, Swine flu failed, avian flu failed, um, uh,
SARS
the
one,
MERS,
pig
SARS
flu,
1.
swine
There's
flu.
been a whole series of them, and each time we're told with clangorous celebration almost, look, we're all going to die. We're going to die from this particular virus. And of course, you need a vaccine, which we just happen to have ready. Yay. And then the virus kind of poops out and fails to kill enough people to be a true pandemic virus, but still we need the vaccine. And we've had just an absurd number of repetitions of this particular scenario. The reason the avian flu, which was intentionally engineered from four genetic sequences of the 1919 flu, pandemic flu, which was recovered from the lungs of an Inuit woman who was preserved in the permafrost in Alaska, extracted and then inserted into a completely benign and non disease causing virus, which is found in birds. The reason that Dr. Taubenberger, with the support of the National Institutes of Health for 6 years, was unable to create a true pandemic virus is that the replication point of the avian flu was the human nose. And the human nose was not quite warm enough. The human lung is, the human sinuses are, the human throat is, but the human nose, with the air moving in and out through it, is not quite warm enough for the virus to propagate quite fast enough to spread and have its desired impact on the tissues and the immune system of the body. So it kind of pooped out. Didn't quite work. Oops. And I said at that time in writing uh, that they would keep trying. There would be more genetically engineered monstrosities, chimeras, designed to wipe out vast segments of humanity in order to bring about depopulation, enslavement, and Richard says total elimination of life. I would like to ask
That's
Richard
really, Richard.
why.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. I'd like to ask Richard why you say that the goal is not depopulation and enslavement a la Agenda 21/2030, but instead total elimination of life, including the life of the perpetrators, which on the face of it sounds a little crazy.
Have you, Richard?
Not
Have you
not
ever
in
read?
terms of your being
Yeah,
crazy,
yeah.
but crazy as an agenda. Hey, I got a great idea. Why don't we kill everybody, including us, Martha?
Hey, Richard, have you ever read C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength? In which indeed the bad guys have as their final goal not just killing everybody else on the planet, but then killing themselves. They'll be the last ones to go. That may be it.
But
But I do have one other thing I'd
tell
like to do
us.
because
Wait.
the question to you before from the audience triggered a whole row of comments by folks who I think these comments are worth listening to for a moment or two because it'll trigger some more discussion. The question to you was, is the vaccine going to cull the population? And your answer is yes, and Richard's answer is a lot more than cull. So now other people are making comments on that. And then there's biomarker dots for total surveillance in the vax. And then do not worry much about vaccines. The masks will push many into dementia within a couple of years. And then another, obviously, never take a vaccine, but if you opt out, it's going to be hard to participate in society. The darkest winter cometh. They keep on telling us. Biden said it twice. And then we go on. Yes, they are not hiding it any longer. The claim, and these are multiple people saying these things, so I'm making it into one person because, in a sense, we're getting the flavor of the audience. The Paul, patients are being moved into hallways. Either they are mask sick or something else has been released. My allergies and others have been particularly bad this month. Maybe we're getting an early warning right here, Dr. Newman. Dr. Try closer to the mic. Missed the whole last comment. Okay, I gotta be closer to the mic. All right, echo is too high. Wow, why am I getting an echo? Isn't that interesting? Well, folks, lower this and see if this is any better. All right, interesting to hear. Will there be cross contamination through vaccine? All right, between sex partners. If one receives the vaccine, the other didn't. Plan that the police will forcefully roll up your sleeve for you. And that's where we are.
Well, I would like to, those are very interesting. The reason that we have comment and chat is so we can indeed have dialogue. I'd like to go back to Richard and ask him again the question. You say not just cull, but eliminate the human population. Tell us more.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's all from vaccines. There are many parallel agendas moving at once under this same uh, purpose. And, they have the technology right now to eliminate everybody overnight if they wanted to. So it took me about 20 years to put the pieces together of what makes sense and why these things are happening. And what I found, and this has to be a really abbreviated version because there's a lot of steps in understanding this, but basically it's a pyramid shaped power structure of the global rulers from the very top, and above that it's not human, and I can go into that at some point too. I actually explored that part as well. And they don't tell the same explanation to all levels of their servants. So at many levels within the power structure, it is about money because people relate to that. And then a little bit higher up in the corporate structure and governments, it's about culling the population, and they get to remain in the elite remnant who is left and have the world as their playground. That's what that level is told. And the levels far above that, the higher levels of the bankers are involved in all these amazing satanic ceremonies where they're killing children and torturing people and stuff like that. And then above that, it's totally not about money or power over other people because they intend to kill them all. And what I ended up finding out is that there is a doctrine in many scriptures of the world, and it's called sacrifice. A misnomer because it's actually a sacrifice that the victim is making. That's the one who gets killed. But they call it a sacrifice by the people doing it. And the general idea, to put it in simple terms, is that if you find an innocent being that's as innocent as possible, maybe a child or a baby or a virgin or a world savior or whoever you want to find that's innocent, and you kill them according to a certain very specific protocol and procedure, and they end up dying in the end, God is really happy with you. And you get all kinds of spiritual benefit. This is obviously not about money. This is actually believed by millions and millions of people. And it's definitely believed by the global rulers. And they thought, wow, that sounds exactly right, because what they want at the top is to actually merge into a kind of cyberspace and live with their dark God forever. That's kind of an immortality in a dark way. And they thought, all right, what is the absolute best sacrifice that we could do to get the benefit that we want, which is not on the physical level? Oh, I know. Sacrifice the whole biosphere. That's the innocent being that they're focusing on. And so, yeah, I mean, in a way. And so it's all life in the biosphere, not just humans, but including humans and including their own bodies in the end, because they won't need their bodies. They really do believe this. And so if they break protocol, which is step by step by step by step, they don't get the reward. And that's fortunate for us, because otherwise, if they got the benefit by just killing us all right away, we would not be talking about this. And so that's their reasoning as far as I could determine after a long investigative process. And I think that gives us time, which we're in right now. They are accelerating, but they haven't done what they could do. And I think they have lots of viruses that would really do massive damage. And it's not only a mistake that they haven't been able to set one of those loose yet, because if they could do it with a psychological virus like they're doing now, that has massive advantages to them. They don't have to mess up the environment of those servants that think they're going to be in the remnant. Once it becomes too obvious that the world will be unlivable, the morale of their troops will be affected. So if the upper management knows this is a fake virus and it's just to get rid of the useless eaters and etc., and they don't know that they also are targeted, then it doesn't lower motivation in the servants. And I think that's what we're seeing unfold right now.
I have a number of responses to what you're saying, Richard. First of all, um, there is absolutely no doubt in the mind of anybody who's thinking clearly about this that various powers that be have had the means to wipe out all life,
Yeah,
including cockroaches, on the
yeah,
planet for quite a while. Doesn't require a virus, requires nuclear weapons. And we have many, 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 many more times, even after arms reduction, many,
right,
many, many more times the nuclear weaponry necessary to annihilate every life form on the planet, except possibly the planet herself, if that is a life form, maybe even the planet herself.
right.
So we have the capacity, they have, we don't, but they have the capacity to have eliminated all life long ago. So if this is an accurate um, elucidation of the plan, then the step by step by step by step nature of it is kind of supported by that. That's my first thought. My second thought is that the one of the great, if this is true, and I don't know if it's true, but it
Sure.
could be, if this is true, one of the great strengths that we have is the fact that a plan this complex and this stepwise um, constructed
Hmm.
is very, very difficult to carry out in exquisite precision. So that, and that's good for us.
Right.
If they feel that they have to have it go according to very, very, very discrete, definitive, and programmed steps, they're going to have trouble
That's the reason
because
for the notices, the predictive programming, everything at exactly the right time, the milestones reached, all that stuff.
yes, but it's still very difficult to bring about. Well, thank goodness.
Right.
So that's the next comment that I had. And the third one is um, horrifyingly, it rings truer than I would hope it would, because in every um, fascistic, tyrannical system, the people who are induced to betray their fellows, the people who are induced to put their well being with the coming tyrant, uh, believe inevitably that their loyalty to the coming tyrant will be rewarded by special privilege, by position, by uh, various kinds of favors for themselves and their families, perhaps. And inevitably, without exception, what happens is that the tyrant, who generally ain't no fool, says, huh, you were willing to betray everything and everyone that was important to you, your wife, your child, your mother, your neighbor, your friend, your city, your religion, whatever. You were willing to betray it. Therefore, your character is such that you will betray me and my order, and therefore those are the first people who are dispatched. Inevitably, whether we're talking about Mao or Stalin or Pol Pot, take Hitler, take your pick. So the possibility of offering people reward, just stick with me, and we'll rule these sheep after we get rid of the ones who raise their bah voices too loud, but stick with me, and people buying into that, saying, yeah, yeah, this is going to be really good for me, and I will do whatever it is that's necessary. And then perpetrating horrible evil in order to get what they're looking forward to, and then being lopped off by the now installed tyrant. This is a repeated pattern in human history, and it strikes me with terror in my heart when I hear you lay this pattern out, because it's so consistent with human short-sighted selfishness and greed for people to help make that possible.
Yeah.
It does happen. I wish I could say, oh no, we're smarter than that, we're wiser than that, we're better than that, we've got churches, for God's sake. The
Right.
fact is, what you're saying is entirely possible. That doesn't make it true.
No, and I'm not saying for anybody to believe me, because I'm absolutely totally fallible like the rest of us. But um,
Oh, now
I,
you've
s- I
pushed me
s-
too far, Richard.
unlike the rest of us, I'm
Yes.
uniquely fallible. But but um, but I put a lot of time into it, and it's something to be looked at. And I don't think that it is a total thing to get upset about, because I've also found potential weak spots that could turn the whole thing around, which do exist. They do exist. You know, we don't have enough time to go into them in detail, but the most, I think that this kind of a thing should be responded to on multiple levels at the same time, and that there are many things that are worth doing. I'm, for example, involved right now in looking for people within the political structure and within the high level power positions in corporations, and the people that basically rule the world, any of those that might be there but not be totally devoted to evil, that could learn about why they don't want to keep doing that. So that's on the outer level, the physical level. Also, people showing their disapproval in mass numbers of non-compliance, things like that, saying we don't consent and that kind of thing. I think that's great. But the real power behind all those, and what probably will determine how effective the physical measures are, is all in the realm of consciousness. And right now, that is so critical and top priority that it makes, when you understand that, this boils down to a consciousness test for humanity. And the good part of it is that everybody, every single individual, is carrying such massive potential to spread a different awareness worldwide, that the top priority of the high level global rulers is to make sure we don't ever access that and we don't become self aware. Because if we did, we'd start getting back what used to be our normal abilities. They can't match those, because one of the laws that controls it is that if you carry malice toward anybody, justified in quotes or not, because it's always justified, we're always right, then you're restricted to the lowest levels of that awareness. And if we're willing to give that up, and they aren't, we could surpass them by infinite orders of magnitude, and there are ways to do that.
I want to make a point that I hope everyone listening takes very seriously. I am a woman of science. I have a white coat. I have a stethoscope. I have a scientific education, and lots of grounding in that world. And that world has valid realities to it and is very useful in certain ways. And I would not push it aside for the usefulness that it has. But I am also aware of the power and the majesty and the might of consciousness and the impact that consciousness has on everything, including that world of physical, logical reality. What Richard is saying is neither woo woo nor strange nor uh, um, disconnected from the magnitude of the problem that we're talking about. Richard is offering up baldly an analysis that we've been taught, many of us, to pay little attention to. But it may be the most important analysis offered. And I know, Ralph, that you have a very strong resonance to
Yes.
what Richard has just said.
Yes. Yes.
I think it might be worth making one comment, even though, clearly, I don't know if assuming you have a cutoff at the top of the hour here, and that's the end of the show.
Yeah, this is the last
Uh,
12 minutes of the program.
yeah, yeah. So let me just make a comment. Understanding what consciousness means is a beginning step, because if we have all these preconceptions about it being some silly thing or new agey belief or something that you just ignore the real world and get lost in it so you feel good and don't have to do anything, um, you can't get anywhere with that. And there's a reality behind it. And it boils down to all awareness beginning with awareness of self. And that doesn't mean intellectually, it doesn't mean accurately listing all the things that are going on bad in the world. It doesn't mean anything like that. It means right now, and this is a hard thing to boil down to 1 minute, but it's like your experience of yourself, moment by moment by moment, for most of us, is a combination of physical body and the senses picking up data from the world around us and the mind's interpretation of those. Not the brain, that's just a switching station, but the actual mind. And we identify more or less with some combination of mind and body. And I'm saying there's something totally different. And it has nothing to do with the belief system. It has nothing to do with memorizing what you're supposed to think or any, it's real experience. And it has to be experience that comes down and is so solid that it even affects events in the physical world. And we have that ability. And I'm saying it starts with self-awareness that is not tied up with any part of body or mind, because we're something else and we have a relation to those two things. But what we are is way beyond that. And belief about it goes nowhere. It's a matter of, can you get to the point of actually living with that experience as real as being in the physical body? And I'm saying you can. And that's the beginning of what they most, above all else, don't want us to find out and experience. Forget the belief. It doesn't work unless you change your whole experience of who you are. And that's not an idea. That's just an attempt to say something about it so it doesn't sound like just a silly idea, because it's something pretty deep.
It is something exquisitely deep. Um, Let me remind people that the pineal gland, deep, deep, deep in the brain, if you draw a line between your two fingers, if you stick them in your ears, and between your two fingers, if you put them on the front and back of your head, at your forehead and the the bulgingest part of the back of your head, where those two lines intersect, the deepest part of the brain houses the pineal gland. The pineal gland is essentially an antenna that reaches out and connects us and receives information from the wider reality, the widest possible reality. One of the things that's been most important to do in the United States and many other countries in the world, yesterday, uh, no longer Israel, but most countries in the world, is to fluoridate water, toothpaste, food. Fluoride causes calcium to precipitate in the pineal gland, short circuiting and destroying your deepest access pathway to the widest possible experience and reality that Richard is talking about. If you want to control people so that they never even notice that they were controlled, destroying that access pathway would be a good place to start. And
Yeah.
that is what fluoridation does. It doesn't help your teeth, quite the contrary. It doesn't help your bones, quite the contrary. But it does make you a more tractable slave.
And that's
That's
tied
part.
directly to growing all the food with poison and, everything related to drug medicine that's poisoning everybody with multiple chemicals. And that it's not mainly for the physical effect, it's because the physical effect affects the consciousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what can we do about that? Well, quite a lot. Truth is a powerful antidote to the poison of lies. Powerful antidotes. Not powerful enough. We also need physical antidotes. We also need to not be eating food that is contaminated with things that poison us, not be drinking uh, liquids that poison us. We also need to test reality in a different way. If it's part of the official narrative, as Richard said, he trusts the people who run BSL-4 laboratories and huge corporations and military complexes and so on to do really bad things. Yes, indeed. And so he should. Um, well, we have to trust each other to be able to do other things, to be able to do things that are quite the opposite of that. And we have to change the way we process information in order to be able to determine truth. Truth rings like a bell, but if you're full of clanging clatter, you can't hear anything, truth or otherwise.
Yeah, I really, admire some of the people who are saying, honestly, just kill the bad guys and all the variations of that. I totally understand. I can empathize with that. I'm just saying to them and everybody else, there is a forgotten level of healing power that is so much stronger than that when that's all dropped and you're willing to go to the next level that's the one that they want us not to discover. It's like in Star Wars when the Emperor wanted Luke to fly into a rage and kill Darth Vader. It's because of the frequency of the rage would prevent him from staying in touch with the good side. And there's something much stronger that we need to get back in touch with. That's actually effective here. It's not a way to get out of your responsibility. It's just the opposite.
So, how hopeful are you that we have a a positive outcome available to us?
I'm 100% confident that it's available. I don't know whether we'll do it in time in this chapter. All of us will still be somewhere to work on it if we don't. But my preference is that we do it now. And that's in our hands. From this point of view, looking from the present, we have a choice. Looking from the future, you can see which choice we did make. But from here, it's experienced as a free will choice. So I see it could go either way, and it's totally in our hands.
Ralph, how would you answer that question?
I think that we create our own reality by our choices. I think that our intentionality has a major role to play. I think we need to maintain positive attitudes. We need to focus on what we want, not on what we fear. Focusing on what we want is a way to move our experience of reality in that direction. Focusing on what we fear is going to get us what we fear. So I think we need to maintain a positive attitude. We need to be willing to learn. We need to be willing to experiment. We need to be willing, especially, to refuse consent. The key is to refuse consent. Even if you're forced to stand in a line and your sleeve is rolled up, you need to say when they bring the needle to you, I don't consent to this. You're violating every ethical standard in human culture. And I don't know if it's going to come to that. I think more likely those of us who refuse are going to find that we can't travel and other privileges may be taken from us in various ways. But I believe that the effect of the vaccines will be so noticeable. I believe that people will realize in the next few months that the effect of the lockdown was so disastrous that people will simply start resisting on a level that the powers that think they do are not prepared to deal with. There'll be a
Uh,
color revolution coming in our society.
What were you going to say,
And
Richard?
just one really short point, and that's on the mask issue. Not only do the masks not have the pore size to stop viral transmission, but there's a strong indication that during the 1918 flu, that many of the deaths were caused by bacterial pneumonia from people wearing masks.
In
And
fact,
the person who wrote about that was Fauci.
exactly. That's what I was going to say. Dr.
Uh,
Anthony Fauci wrote an article stating that the masked ones were buried by the unmasked ones in the 1919 pandemic flu because, of course, he knows.
You're right, Richard. It's motivated by a level of evil that's hard to understand, accept.
Yeah, normal people don't relate to it.
And it's very difficult for normal people to relate to psychopaths because a psychopath has no affiliation with anything, neither chick nor child. Nothing matters to the psychopath except his or her own perceived good. Normal people cannot believe that anybody exists for whom nothing else besides themselves is important. And so they tend to excuse it, to erase it, to burnish it out of the picture, to paint it over, to not see it. Psychopaths are, by and large, invisible to normal people, and that's their power.
Yeah, and the power we have is much more. We just have to get in touch with it.
Exactly. Exactly. And part of our power is sharing information. And
Right.
the sharing part is so important. We are reaching out with our minds, with our hands, and with our hearts to encompass other people and offer them what we have and take from them what they are in turn offering us. It is a communication. We're putting us in little Zoom boxes and blocking our facial expressions and keeping us from touching one another and seeing each other is part of breaking down our ability to share. By the way, really quickly, I refuse to mask. And so when I am prevented from masking, I file a complaint online, very simple, with the Americans with Disability Act, with my state and with my county, saying I have a medical condition which prevents me from masking. I get very anxious when I see a lot of stupid people. And therefore, I will not mask. I am exempt according to the law. I am being discriminated against. And that if millions of us do that, we are protecting each other.
Yeah.
We are unmasking the stupidity and the pointlessness and the mind control activity that we're being subjected to. So I urge you, if you are being discriminated against, that you do that. Americans with Disability Act online. Your state has a law stating that if you have a medical condition, you don't have to mask. That's associated with breathing, and of course you do because it makes you anxious to see stupid people. And your county or your local smallest unit of government also matches the Americans with Disability Act, whether it's private property or public property. It's part of the U.S. and the law prevails. Use it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard, for being our guest. Dr. Rima, another exciting Dr. Rima Truth Reports, the Unmasked Crusaders, is coming
Thank
to
you,
an end.
Ralph.
Folks, we will be back again next week with another
Thank you,
interesting
Richard.